Hello, I'm Marina Johnson, and this is TABLEWORK, a TAPS podcast series where we interview the artists and theater makers behind our productions on what it takes to get their productions from the page to the stage. This episode features TAPS PhD student Lucas Baisch, who's writing, directing, and performing in his Grad Rep piece, Clawbet Bounty. Grad Rep is a project meant to showcase the work of our second-year graduate student artist scholars. Join us as we learn more about Lucas's project. Lucas, I'm so excited to get to talk to you today about your Grad Rep project.
Thanks, Marina.
To start us off, can you share a little bit about the questions or ideas you're currently exploring in your PhD work?
I think I came in knowing that I would study dramatic literature, coming in as a playwright, 20th and 21st century, mostly contemporary leaning. But as I've been here, I've taken a wide serving classes in literature and environmental humanities, media studies. And I'm really attracted to this emergent field of discard studies, which is kind of graduation of waste studies, which is thinking about waste and disposability, both metaphorically and materially. And there hasn't been an incredible amount of work done linking that work to performance. There has been a little bit linking it to literature. So thinking of systems of categorization, what is made worthy of disposal. Also, like taking like a grammar of abjection from Kristeva. Yeah, I mean, thinking about the grotesque too. It's been super fun.
That's really exciting. Can you just say a little bit more about discard studies? It's not a field that I'm.
Yeah, I mean, it's super new. It was kind of defined, and I don't want to attribute it completely to these two. I believe they're anthropologists, Max Liberon and Josh Lepowski. They're Canadian. Uh, thinking not only about the product or the residue of waste, but the scalar systems that make waste occur. So thinking about infrastructure a lot. And I just think, when I was applying for the PhD program, I had read this really ominous kind of bite-sized fact in Nature journal that was like, we have now encountered the hinge point in which there is more anthropogenic like material and waste in the world than there are like living people and living creatures. So there's more matter around us in terms of density of weight. And as artists, I'm like, okay, it's time to like reckon with the things around us. Which there is a tradition of investigating like performing things, obviously with like Bernstein, Fiber Matter, Jane Bennett. So just thinking maybe a little more sharply about what constitutes garbage.
Oh, I mean, that makes sense. I love that you're thinking in this tradition of, right, we think about performance as involving or interacting with the things around us, but really looking materially at what that means and looks like. That's really exciting. Thank you for sharing that.
Of course, I think like the next step from it is thinking about how it impacts language. Like, what is a disposable language, and how are writers, especially writers working in performance, thinking about the world of like revision and maybe recycling is like an apt way to think of it.
Well, and so Grad Rep, your project that you're working on right now, is certainly a part of this PhD journey, a milestone in the second year. Can you tell us what that project looks like? And also, I'm curious what sparked the idea for the project, if it's coming from this discard studies, um, thought that you're having, or if it's from someplace else.
Yeah, totally. Kind of tangentially, sure. Yeah, I mean, the past couple of years, I've been working with objects a lot in performance and writing from the objects. So, working with scenic designers or visual artists to start from a very generative phase at the beginning. For instance, I've been working for many years on a play with like a miniature artist, like thinking about miniatures and scale, and thinking about the psychology of what happens to a character when they're encountering things that are like uncannily sized down or scaled up. So I was interested in working scenically very closely, but really it was prompted by just an image. Like I was going on a walk with one of my cohort mates, Caitlin Main, last year, like kind of speculating on what I could do for grad rep. And I had this picture of like a person crammed into like a crane game claw machine stuck in my head. Just like completely absurd, kind of disturbing, very silly, and kind of back engineering from that point. So now what's happened is scenic designer Daniel Jackson, who's also a PhD in the program, and I have been building these like three monuments in the shop, or I'm calling them monuments. I think I named them monuments of American contingency. So it's a crane game, as you would find in like a shopping mall or an arcade, a blackjack table, and a hunting blind, which is a structure which hunters sit in as they're waiting for their prey. And they're all like half size, third size, fifth size, so they're small. They kind of sit on plinths, and they're made of wood, plywood. So they're all kind of like facsimiles. They're kind of purposefully like both the prototypical version of what that monument is, but maybe also the kind of ruin or desecration of what that object is.
Oh, that's so exciting. Okay, so the title of your piece is Claw Bet Bounty. I'm now okay, Claw coming maybe from the Claw game. I don't know if you want to speak any more to the title.
Sure. I mean, yeah, it's also the kind of pragmatic nature of my title. Claw is just claw machine, bet is the gambling, and bounty is seeking out a bounty.
That makes
Um,
sense. Sorry for not immediately getting that. That makes
no,
perfect
no,
sense.
no. I mean, yeah, yeah, that's what it is.
Oh, very interesting. Okay, so you already talked about Daniel Jackson, a PhD student as scenic designer, as a collaborator. Who are other collaborators you're working with for this piece?
Sure. I mean, I've done this kind of devilish thing where I've only recruited grad students, aside from one undergrad, Trini Rogano, who is doing lighting, who's fantastic. But I'm also working. Okay, so Daniel is scenic and is also performing in it. There's also like a doubling of roles across the piece. I mean, I'm performing in it, I'm directing it, and I wrote it. Um, Daniel is in it. Connor Lifson is kind of providing some dramaturgical directorial assistance, but is also in it. First year PhD Fiona Selmy is dramaturg, and seventh year Delight of My Life PhD Danielle Adair is also in it. Um, so there's a funny occurrence where people have these relationships. The audience will be Stanford, us. So there will be this kind of like meta narrative of these people we recognize in these kind of absurd circumstances, which I'm also kind of thrilled about. But others, Bailey Sheska, who's an MFA in studio art, is doing costumes. Anna Golubkova, who is in the composition program, is doing sound. Am I forgetting anyone? I think that's it.
What a team.
I know, it's great. It's been great. I love them all. Oh, and also, oh my God, how could I forget? There's one other performer, Jorge Cibaja, who is my friend, who is also an assistant curator at Cantor, the Cantor Museum. Yeah, and I think it's his first time in a play. I'm not sure, but he's in it and he's doing it.
That's incredible. I am so excited. I was already excited, but wow, what a team of people you have working on this piece. And it says a lot about you and this piece that you have so much grad student buy-in, and people who are like really just invested in this idea. Because I mean, as we know, it's so uh, the dream is to always be able to do our scholarship and art at the same time, and it's so hard in practice to have everybody in the room to do this. So,
Mhm.
kudos to you and the team on making this happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is just like reciprocity. I think I knew last year, I was like, okay, I have to show up for people to show up for me. And I think that involved like going to Connor's shows, both at Stanford and outside of Stanford, participating in Daniel's development stage, and having a really concerted, focused relationship in that regard because I do want to be making art while I'm in this program. For me, that is, we talk about the scholar artist. For me, maybe I would flip it and like I lead with artists. It is more the pursuit of an artist scholar in this program.
Grad Rep really tries to emphasize this idea. I also use artist scholar as the artist being the first term. But how do you see this project bringing your creative practice and your academic research into conversation with each other?
I mean, it's definitely a challenge. It places so much more responsibility on me since I'm taking on all of these roles. I'm very used to the kind of, speaking of categorization earlier, like the strict hierarchy of the American theater. And, I am a playwright. I've been a playwright for over 10 years. And I find a lot of comfort in that identification apart from being a director where I kind of like peer into a room and say a couple sentences and then disappear and am like voyeur to interpretation. Here, it's much more akin to like, being a facilitator of a classroom, where I'm on deck all the time and I am accountable for every inch of the project. Um, with the knowledge that there's porousness like everywhere. Uh, but it does necessitate a kind of responsibility which feels parallel to the work I'm trying to do as a researcher and scholar here, just in terms of identity, because that's also like a very new role for me. Yeah, and it's funny seeing just how like the things I'm learning in the classroom seep into the rehearsal. I'm taking these great classes on genre studies and kind of post-war ruin right now. And, a lot of the questions people were asking 50, 60, 70 years ago are completely applicable today.
Startling how that continues to be the case in so many ways.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through your process so far? So you mentioned, which I loved, walking with your cohort mate, and sort of having the idea. From there, how have you gotten to this point?
Well, I knew that I had like a very specific build for this project. So starting from last fall, Daniel, Jackson, and I were like, okay, we are going to go into the shop. We're going to get shop trained. And we're going to help you build these things because we have like a very specific image in mind. And the shop guys who've been incredible, especially Zach and Beckett, who are both new also this year. So they're like learning through Grad Rep with us. Um, we've been working with them since actually in the shop since December. And that's been great because I think I have also wanted to think about how, the scenographic elements inform the production of the script. So as I was building these things, I was finishing my draft of the script, which is such a luxury and so different than how the majority of American theater works. There's like a very prescribed kind of equity dictated 29-hour model workshop, which I have never really felt comfortable in. And I think because of the fluid and flexible nature of grad rep, you're able to make the process what you want it to be. So for me, it was like, let's integrate design from the beginning and see how that influences my text.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think grad rep can, as you sort of said, be what you make it in different ways, which is both a wonderful thing and sometimes a tricky thing. But it sounds like being able to have this sort of building process as you're writing has been really lovely. How long have you been working on the text?
The text, I think I started last summer. I would just do these bursts of writing with other people. I like to write with other people where we do kind of Pomodoro. We set like a 45-minute timer and we're like, okay, we're going to write this much, do it. And then maybe I'll make the person like share a sentence with me or something. It's really just a tactic I used when I was teaching playwriting classes. But that kinda accountability helps me finish the writing. And it's also like an awkward form because of, the time parameter on Grad Rep. The most you can do is like a 1 act, which, I haven't written a 10-minute play or a 1 act, probably in like 9 or 10 years, because often it's treated as a kind of introductory form into playwriting. And there's only so much you can do. You have to be very economic with your time and your language with a 1 act. It's not something you can really luxuriate inside as you can maybe a 2-hour play.
Well, so we've talked a little bit about the scenic design, which sounds so striking, and I'm really excited to see these elements come to life. Are there other elements of design that you're particularly invested in working with right now?
Yeah, I'm super excited about lighting, especially 'cause, Trini had this wonderful idea to do some inset lighting in these monuments, because I think part of the idea is we're thinking of them as these, like, sentient creatures. How do these things get enlivened? Not only in the activation of performance, but just like in the minds of the audience. And things like light and sound, honest sound is also incredible. And we have very similar kind of aesthetic styles that are very like industrial, kind of droning, maybe oppressive is an appropriate word, that are intended to kind of shock people outside of themselves. So yeah, super stoked on those things. And there's also some, without giving too much of it away, there's some audience participatory elements that I am excited about. Also, you welcome failure in those moments, so we'll see what that does. But, for a project that thematically is engaged with like risk and chance, it feels appropriate. But I think a lot of this project has been a needling into that which makes me uncomfortable or I have limited experience with, like audience participation, like the idea of gambling. I've never gambled in my life. And we actually made it in our rehearsal schedule. We're taking a field trip to this casino in San Bruno called Artichoke Joe's. I've never heard of this, but
What a
Fiona,
name.
the dramaturg, I know, I heard that name and I was like, "We have to go." It's right off Caltrain apparently. But yeah, we're going like the week after next week, to do some fieldwork research, in the casino.
Oh, that makes sense. I mean, that's really exciting. We know, I mean, I know intellectually I haven't been in one of these spaces, but there's so much design involved in these gambling spaces, right?
Yes, and that's, like, influenced so much of the conversation we've had about, like, how are you cued to want to engage in the game of betting, just environmentally, architecturally. That has come up a lot, and also sports betting. I don't know if you know anything about the world of sports betting. I did not know anything because I am a queer 34-year-old male who does not engage in that culture. But some of my collaborators were like, "Oh, you're gonna get, like, some young sports betting kids in the audience who are gonna be engaging with you," and I'm like, "What is that? Tell me about that." And there's this whole world of, like, normalized online betting through apps, to kind of forego the act of, like, approaching a bookie counter. It's like, taken the perhaps, like, degenerate identification of, like, the gambler and tidied it, made it neater or cleaner,
Mhm.
so that it's, like, a system of community for, like, mostly young men. And I'm learning that people place bets on everything, like, not just sports, but, like, war. Like, who was I talking to? Like, my aunt the other day, when I was, like, on this hype about sports betting. She was like, "People were betting on, like, the kind of, recent events in Venezuela." And I was like, "This is so grotesque to me." Um, yes, so now I'm just thinking about how, like, betting permeates our culture kind of unknowingly or unconsciously.
Oh, this is fascinating, and thank you for sharing these examples. I am really fascinated by this. We had some football games on recently and noticed that there are constantly ads for sports betting, and I did not realize like how pervasive this is, and really what a way to make something so passive that you can just do it from an app on your phone, as with so many other things.
Yeah, and it opens up questions of authenticity because rigging is such a huge part of betting,
Mhm.
and how that might even function as a kind of premonitory device, like, not only with, the outcome of an NBA game, like, who is, like, willfully, you know, reducing their quality, but also in terms of, like, politics and, like, elections, and I'm like, "This is so dark."
Wow, it really raises a lot of questions.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a thing that you can easily get paranoid about, but I think the point is that it's, interesting for me. I think because I'm interested in, like, an irritant theater rather than a redeeming one,
Mhm.
to kinda poke holes in this culture that sits on top of the one that we walk around in every day.
Well, I love the idea of an irritant theater. And I'm really excited to see this piece. I am going to ask you a question that I am curious how you'll feel. Um, but when audiences encounter this work, what do you hope stays with them afterwards? Are there questions or feelings or conversations that you hope it opens up? And of course, not in a prescriptive way, just curious what this might bring up for you.
Oh, that is a good question. I think an earlier version of myself would have resisted a question like that, but I think it's an important one. And it's interesting because I'm taking the temperature of a Stanford audience for the first time, really. Like, I've been to a lot of performances, but I've never been the author of any of those performances. I love making, like, weird experimental theater, and I don't really know how that lands for people here. I don't know if there is, like, a kind of legibility for that here. I think there might be. Um, but I just hope people are game, like, with the project of it, because it's not linear at all. It's kind of a triptych of scenes, and I can say this because it happens at the top. The audience chooses the sequence of the show. So there are 6 different possible permutations of how the show goes. Um, so I'm hoping that in itself is a kind of thrill that sticks with people, that there's a kind of game involved in this play. So I hope really it just, like, opens up for people what their definitions of theater or a play could be.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much, Lucas, for sharing this. I am so excited for this piece. I'm sure people who are listening are too. Yes, and wishing you the best with Claw Bet Bounty.
Thank you so much.